I'm Bob Burrill. I'm recording this on January 21st, 2025. The title is Things Are Not Always As They Seem. That was a saying of my mother's father, my maternal grandfather, Joseph Philip Richard. Joseph Philip Richard died in 1960. I was a little boy when he died, so I only vaguely remember him. But my mother used to talk about a number of sayings of my grandfather's, and that's one of them. Things are not always as they seem. And the older I've gotten, I'm now only a few years younger than he was when he died, but the older I've gotten, the more I've learned and seen that things are not always as they seem. And it may be that you're watching this video today because that's a lesson God wants you to learn. Things are not always as they seem. You know, Matthew chapter 10, verse 16 says, "Be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves." That's an interesting verse. Say, how can I be wise as a serpent, but harmless as a dove? It's saying, be really streetwise, but be really nice and pleasant and kind. Those can seem like weird combinations, but that's in the Bible. And God is telling us, be nice, be pleasant, be kind, but be really streetwise. Why? Because things are not always as they seem. About 2 years ago, when I was working a full-time secular job in a call center, and we were allowed to have our phones by our side, but not to abuse that. So my phone was there, and someone sent me a message on my phone, and while I had a few minutes in between calls, I checked the message. And the message said it was from Pastor Gary, my pastor at Bread of Life Church, and he was asking me to go to a Target store and to leave my credit card information for him to buy something for somebody who really needed it right away. And, I read it, and I read it again, and I thought, would my pastor, and the church I go to, and my wife and I go to, is not near where we live. We must get the long distance award for church. It just seemed weird that Pastor Gary would be sending me a message telling me to go to a Target store and give my credit card information, and he was going to use that to buy something for somebody who needed it. That didn't make a lot of sense. Well, I had just a very brief few minutes, but I contacted, he's not on Facebook, he's not on a lot of social media, but his wife is. I contacted his wife and I asked, did Pastor Gary really put out a message saying this? And she said, absolutely not. I said, I didn't think so. And so she put something out on social media saying, don't believe any supposed message from him to give Target your credit card information or anything like that. But there were people from the church that thought it was real, and some said they were fully prepared to go over to Target and give their credit card information. Things are not always as they seem. We need to be aware of that. When I was much younger, back in the early 1980s, I was an associate pastor at a large church, and there was a guy in his family that came into the church, and he was a little bit older than me at the time, not much. I remember he was brand new in the church. I don't want to use his real name. I'll call him Curtis. Curtis was not his name, but Curtis came in, brand new in the church. There was a church work day. We had some major stuff to do on the property, landscaping work, and it was hard work. It was hard work. I believe it was on a Saturday. It was a lot of time and it was a lot of hard work. But thank God a lot of people showed up and worked. But listen, this guy Curtis, he worked harder than anybody else there. So I was really impressed. And I began to be really impressed and enamored with this guy Curtis. And I thought he was really sincere and he really had a hunger for God and all. But, some people used to warn me and say, Curtis is not what you think he is. He's a con artist. He really doesn't love Jesus. He really isn't a hard worker. All of that is an image. He's trying to sucker you in. I didn't believe it. You know what? It was true. I believed in Curtis. I stuck up for Curtis. I defended Curtis. And sometime later, Curtis skipped town. He left his wife and kids. He disappeared. And it turned out there was an awful lot wrong with that guy. Things are not always as they seem. Things are not always as they seem. 2 Corinthians 11:14 says, Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Oh, Pastor Bob, an angel came and spoke to me, and he told me thus and so, and I know it was of God. Really? Well, it could have been from Satan. Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. This may sound like a crazy illustration, but Jesus spoke in parables, which are really illustrations of spiritual truth. And this is going to sound really crazy to a lot of you. In fact, a lot of people that are much younger than me may not even know what Lost in Space is. Lost in Space was a very popular TV show when I was about 11 years old, and starring Guy Williams and June Lockhart and several others. A lot of the episodes are absolutely crazy. There's an episode of Lost in Space from its second season. It's called The Golden Man. The Golden Man. And you ought to watch that episode. You can find it on YouTube, The Golden Man. And I'll tell you, the costumes they used in that episode were insane. You know what they use for landmines? If you watch it, you'll see. For landmines, they use beach balls. They used some crazy props, and they had some crazy costumes. The story was that John Robinson, who was the leader of the group on Lost in Space, and his assistant, Major Don West, and John Robinson's son, Will, went off exploring someplace. And they left Dr. Smith, who was a total nut job, I guess, in charge back at the Jupiter 2, the base, with the women. Now, none of that made any sense. And while most of the men were gone, 2 space aliens showed up, and they each had separate spaceships. And one of them was called Mr. Kima. He was all golden. They must have had an interesting time doing that costume, but he was a golden man. That's why it's called the Golden Man. He was all golden. He was friendly. He was pleasant. He was likable. He was affirming. And the women and Dr. Smith absolutely loved Mr. Kima, except the character Angela Cartwright played, Penny. She didn't. She didn't like him. Now, the other space alien was, and he was wearing this horrible-looking frog costume that they must have got on sale someplace, and he was surly. He was surly and weird and mean and not likable. And the reason these 2 aliens were on the planet is they said they came from a society where instead of countries having a war and thousands or millions of soldiers get killed, well, they reduced it down to just 2 people, one representing each side. And they were there to have a war. Basically, I guess to shoot nuclear weapons at each other or something. And again, and incidentally, Angela Cartwright there, Penny, thought the Frogman was wonderful. And again, as you watched it, you thought, boy, this frog alien is mean and surly and negative and an awful guy. But the Golden Man, Mr. Kima, what a wonderful guy. Well, you can probably guess where I'm going, because the way the episode turns out, the Golden Man was very evil and was a horrible, horrible individual. The Frogman, who seemed terrible, was really not a bad person at all. And as far as the dispute between the two, he was the good guy. The weird Frogman was the good guy. The Golden Man was the bad guy. Now, yes, that was made for children. I was about 11 the first time I watched it. But there's a lot of people, I'm 70 years old now. There's a lot of 70-year-olds and a lot of people of all ages that ought to watch that episode of Lost in Space. Because so often, I read all these comments on Facebook. So often, people are like me with that Curtis guy years ago. I was fully taken in by him. I was fooled by him. People are like that solicitation that supposedly was Pastor Gary asking for money, go to your Target, give them the credit card information, but it wasn't. People are taken in. Things are not always as they seem. That's what I'm feeling impressed to share today. Things are not always as they seem. You know, I'm part of the Assemblies of God, which came out of the Pentecostal revival of the very early 20th century. There was a powerful, powerful move of God in Los Angeles right around 1906, 1907, 1908. One of the most powerful moves of God that's ever happened since the first century. And do you know where they met? Thousands of people poured into Los Angeles from all over the world. They met at the Azusa Street Mission, which was a rundown old building that was a former stable. Now think of it in 1906, 07, 08. If you wanted to go and have an encounter with God in a church, you might think, well, I'm going to go to a great cathedral. But if you really wanted a great encounter with God, you know where you should have gone? To Azusa Street Mission, a rundown old building. Did they have PowerPoint? You think they had PowerPoint in 1906? No. Did they have a great sound system? No. Did they have a great worship team? I don't think so. Did they have a great facility? No. But what was there? What was there was God. Was God. People had encounters with God that changed their lives. And from there, the gospel went out all over the world. Listen, again, there's a reason why you're watching this video. Pray about it when it's over. I'm serious. Things are not always as they seem. Things are not always as they seem.